to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Tsukuman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Jesse Attah-Olottah. He's a security and intelligence analyst, OSINT specialist, threat and enterprise risk manager, and geointelligence enthusiast. And today we'll be speaking about the concept of international relations in West Africa, the security situation there, especially after the recent coup, what that means for the struggle between different groups and their vying for power. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to be in this area?
Thank you very much. I think you've done a very decent introduction. Like you mentioned, I am Jesse Attah. I am an ISO Tech certified intelligence analyst based here in Abuja, Nigeria. I deal largely in open source intelligence. And my professional focus is in enterprise risk management solutions, which encompasses conducting comprehensive threat security assessment for business continuity plans and incident response management for businesses here in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
So to start off with, the security landscape in Nigeria and in West Africa is quite complex. We've seen a number of both political coups in the last few years, as well as a struggle, sectarian struggles, terrorist organizations, conflicts between the law enforcement and some of these organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about the breakdown of everything that is going on? Who are the key stakeholders? Who are the key players? Who are the biggest threats that we're dealing with?
All right, thank you very much. Well, Nigeria and neighbors in Sahel and also in Central Africa all face form of similar significant security threats, bordering around insurgency from local aggrieved groups and also terrorism from international threat terror actors. Some of like you mentioned, key stakeholders in the region border around the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. The Islamic State over time has been able to consolidate with various groups across in Nigeria, within Nigeria, the Sahel region, West Africa as a whole, and Central Africa, and likewise Al-Qaeda. Their pursuit has mostly bordered around, really gaining grounds and taking up territories that lack significant government presence. And all of these have been, have been successful over the years due to poor policies in certain parts of the country and poor security operations in this environment. But while the situation remains fluid, there have been significant gains over the years as well in terms of pushing for regional cooperation in countering terrorism, as well as a more intentional drive by government in really pushing its influence in certain areas and reclaiming those areas from terror groups.
One of the issues people have been concerned about is that local law enforcement was alleged to be engaging in human rights abuses when confronting this de-radicalization process. To what extent is that still true? Has there been any improvement in that area?
Well, in Nigeria, where I am, internal security, mostly led by the Nigerian police, have had significant issues of misconduct going by the 2020 anti police brutality protests, which really took the country in shock and surprise. Nigeria has dealt largely with a lot of these internal security issues due to corruption from security agencies and lack of accountability over the years. You will recall that even the Boko Haram situation was sparked by the killing of Mohammed Yusuf in Borno, in which was carried out and in form of police misconduct, where he was shot multiple times at the entrance of a police station, which really increased the intensity of the anger and the pain among his followers, and really making situation really worse. In terms of the military, we've also have had allegations of such misconduct, and yet scandals and various forms of allegations still keep on coming up from now and then. But interestingly, there has been significant increase with past government, which came in 2015, in terms of security sector reforms. Though it has not been perfected, but we have seen a tremendous shift from traditional means of really dealing with our security issues to meeting international standards and really creating that room for international collaboration in dealing with insecurity issues within the country.
And speaking of these internal processes, to what extent has there been success in de-radicalization or essentially former fighters for terrorist organizations voluntarily leaving these organizations and reintegrating into society?
Well, Nigeria, like every other country battling with terrorism as a whole, have had various mechanisms, both overt and covert. Some of the open and well-known initiatives have been the ones initiated by government over the years in really bringing in non-threatening actors back into reintegrating them back into society through special rehabilitation programs held in the northeast part of the country, where for a period of time people are brought in, retaught certain morals and values of society, and then brought back into society. There have been aspects of accountability where um, threatening actors have been forced to face legal actions for their actions over the past, bordering around um, um, attacks on civilians and government facilities and all. So well, it's not that perfect, but I believe the country has continued to make significant progress in this area as well.
You mentioned earlier Boko Haram, and we've all seen the horrible imagery of Boko Haram abducting Nigerian schoolgirls, threatening society, engaging in mass havoc and terror. To what extent is Boko Haram a significant social factor, and what is the latest with it?
Well, Boko Haram continues to remain a recurring threat, despite what would be called a significant beating, which the group faced in 2021 with the killing of its leader, Chekau. But yet the group still continues to operate in scattered cells, not just in the northeast, and we've heard speculations of shifts to the northwest region of the country. But yet in the northeast, there are still pockets of attacks carried out by these groups in what looks more like intergroup attacks. There have also been attacks on civilians, particularly those that find themselves in areas that they still have some significant influence. You have various factions of the group, both within Nigeria and also in Cameroon. And and of course the group still tries to maintain its its position, its standing against its foes, bordering around the Islamic State and the Nigerian government itself.
Now, other terrorist international players in the region are Al Qaeda affiliates and ISIS affiliates. Could you tell us about the evolution of these organizations that at one point, my understanding is partnered against the government state actors, but then also ended up crashing? Who is the leader now? To what extent has the power shift affected the local environment?
Oh, well, we've anyone that knows Nigeria and its fight against counterterrorism will always mention Boko Haram being a recurring name. And to a great extent there was very little to say about Islamic State in Nigeria here. But aside Boko Haram, which of course had been a leading threat actor in Nigeria, the Islamic State has also over the years shown itself to be a strong foe in country as a whole. The Islamic State, of course, has also received a significant beating by the Nigerian government with greater military action in the northeast part of the country, particularly with area bombardment, which has been carried out largely by the Nigerian Air Force. Um, we've seen ISWAP taking more of guerrilla warfare form of operation rather than its open attacks that it had carried out in the past as a show of force and strength in the threat terrain. Um, Aside these two actors, that Islamic State and Boko Haram, you have groups such as Ansaru, which had relocated its operation to the northwest region of Nigeria, but had remained largely um, low key, as it will seem, just mostly offering logistics and logistic support to other threat actors, local threat actors, bandits in the northwest region of the country. But outside of Nigeria, we still have Boko Haram and its Al Qaeda links to other groups in Cameroon and Niger Republic as well. You also have the Islamic State in Nigeria, in West Africa. You have Islamic State in the Sahel region as well, another province on its own, and the Islamic State in Central Africa province. All of these have continued to be a form of push for regional support amongst a lot of these terror affiliates in order to increase their standing within the region.
Speaking of the Sahel, there's been quite a lot of ups and downs between all these international affiliates. At some points, Al Qaeda was the more prevalent. Al Qaeda affiliates were the more prevalent. At other points, the ISWAP and other similar actors hold sway. What is the situation now, and how did they get to the point of primacy? How do these terrorist organizations cross-pollinate and recruit from another? And what makes one more successful than another?
I strongly believe in, I think these groups largely leverage on consolidation, their ability to merge with smaller groups and um, beat other groups in their claimed territories, artificial territories, as we would like to look at it. I think they leverage on the amount of beating they give the other in terms of how many fighters on the Boko Haram camp can they kill in a single attack, and how many can Boko Haram kill in a single attack against ISWAP. Again, these forms of attack goes to demoralize groups and create room um for jumping ship, where you have ex-fighters from Al Qaeda jumping over to the Islamic State and all of that. And again, taking over territories, large swaths of ungoverned territories that some of these groups control, is also is also a form of success marker for some of these groups. As taking over territory helps to um, claim fighters and weapons, as well as control transport routes for the movement of illegal materials across the border.
We are seeing that a lot of the times there is a sort of alliance or informal alliance between terrorist organizations and local organized crime, criminal groups, and sometimes also sectarian movements or liberation movements. How has that played into this security landscape?
In Nigeria, for one, it has really made things quite complicated. We saw post 2021, after the killing of Chekau, saw groups moving from the northeast part of the country to the northwest part of the country to consolidate with local bandit groups that had been causing rampage in the northwest region of the country. Um, this movement of Boko Haram ex-fighters looked quite threatening to the Islamic State as well, who also decided to put some of its fighters over to this part of the region in order to also find some level of standing in that particular area. I think groups largely try to merge with some of these bigger groups in terms of what they bring to the table, weapons, the manpower to also overcome their own forms of foe as to look. Um, this continued consolidation is also due to long-held grievances that have mostly driven certain groups to carry out certain actions that they do carry out at this moment. And without addressing some of these grievances, on the long run, continues to propel such actions of having militia groups scattered across the region, across the country, and looking to consolidate with terror groups despite their ideologies and their doctrines, just to increase their capabilities and make themselves very dominant actors in their various threat terrain.
And there's also, what are some of these sectarian or liberation-based grievances that feed into the narratives of these recruitment organizations?
Sorry, can you come again?
What are some of these sectarian or social or liberation-based grievances that feed into the recruitment narratives for these terrorist organizations? What specific
Oh,
grievances are we talking about?
those that mostly border around political needs and political wants. Um, to give a typical example, you have that of bandits here in Nigeria, and you see bandits pushing this idea of some level of marginalization and maltreatment by the government. Yet, despite the plainness and simplicity of some of these grievances, yet you do not see they are lacking direct initiatives from the government in actually dealing with these particular situations. So in a case where certain groups are coming out to say, see, we are affected by the lack of fair distribution of wealth across the country, and yet they are met with strong military actions. Some of these grievances push groups to say, you know what, perhaps I can't um, easily dialogue with with the government. In this case, I need to pick up weapons, I need to pick up arms in order to defend myself. And you see terror groups leverage on this sentiment to aggravate tension and the use of arms and all of that. And you see, even government actions on its own, we've seen in cases where groups have decided to have formed this mentality where, if there are no armed hostility, government will never want to listen to you. So you have to pick up arms in order to disturb the government for them to actually want to negotiate or even listen to your complaint. So all of that encompassing is largely leveraged by terror groups in order to grow their ideologies and their influence in with various sectarian groups thereabout.
How has this dynamic impacted the civilians in both Nigeria and I guess the Sahel, the region in general?
Sorry?
How has this dynamic impacted the civilians?
Well, we've seen conflicts has continued to increase, attacks have continued to increase, and largely it's well mostly looking at displacement of people from their original land of settlement to refugee camps and IDP camps, as to same here in Nigeria. The displacement of people have um again, in turn, largely affected agriculture in the country, where farmers can't go back to their farmland due to fear of being attacked or extortions by some of these actors, threat actors that control certain territories.
So what can the government and law enforcement learn from the strategies and the networks that these organizations form, and to what extent uh, has the movement and migration around the region made complicated or facilitated counterterrorism operations?
Um, so from Nigeria, speaking from Nigerian perspective, in terms of adapting to changing dynamics with various actors, we've seen that largely with security forces, particularly the military, with the what I'll call transformation of certain security operations and adapting to these new hostilities in order to respond effectively in dealing with the issue before it gets out of hand. One, for example, have likely been seen in the northeast region of Nigeria, where we've seen the movement of from Operation Lafia Dole to Operation Handakai between 2015 and 2021, in which the prior operation had largely identified Boko Haram as a key threat actor in the region, and the latter being an identification of not just Boko Haram but other extremist groups in the region. Of course, this has also largely been felt across the entire country with robust military operations that have not solely dealt with dealing with traditional crimes in like armed robbery and kidnapping within the country alone, but also having a focus on counterterrorism due to the increase in certain groups adopting terrorism as a form of as an approach in carrying out some of their attacks and insurgencies or radicalization in the country, such as that we've seen, as I mentioned, banditry in the northwest and the IPOP situation in the southeast region of the country.
And to what extent are non-terrorist abductions a factor in the security picture of the country? How often do they
Well,
happen?
so kidnapping has gone from being um, largely predictable to being very unpredictable these days. Kidnapping is not just it's not does not just occur in areas with active security threat concerns, but also happens in areas with less severe security threat concerns, such as like in Lagos or Akwa Ibom, for example. Um, and this is largely due to certain aspect of economic strain in the country that has affected many in the country. Also, the impunity of groups to carry out certain attacks without fear of government or government security forces response. which again has to do with corruption in where there've been allegations um of collusion between criminals and security agencies in the country. And again, we've seen groups, ideological groups, not just carrying out kidnap attacks before as part of their ideological belief, but now carrying out kidnapping attacks as a means to fund their movement and um, really boost their capabilities on the field.
Let's talk about recruitment strategies. How do these groups identify their targets, and what do they do to exploit those grievances? How exactly does the process work?
Well, looking at it from the religious point of view, first you look at radicalization, based off of religion. We find ourselves in a region that is highly religious, um, both in the Christian side and the Islamic side, as well as the traditional worshippers in various environments. You have people who you find yourself with people who are more in tune with their religious belief and seek this religious belief first before seeking logical understanding of certain things. And this has largely been where these groups are really able to um indoctrinate or young people into their sect. um Aside from religion, you have ethnicity, which is also another driving factor. Ethnicity is very big here in the region,
Mhm.
where people identify themselves more by their ethnic group before even their national identity. And this I speak with confidence as a Nigerian as well. And some of these ethnic grievances can largely be exploited in so many ways and can be used to lure people into various movements. And a typical example is like what we've seen with the IPOB issue in the southeast region of the country.
And what efforts are made to diffuse these factors? How has there been an effort to kind of focus on the building of a national identity? To what extent is that successful?
Oh, well, it has continued to dwindle in various ways. There lacks this national consensus, this drive for a national consensus in dealing with the common foe, having such mentality across the country, because some of these initiatives continue to be hampered by religious and ethnic bias as well. And I think one I even missed was a political bias. Um, the lack of a national drive and a national consensus to really educate citizens in identifying terrorism and shunning terrorism continues to be one of the areas that we are missing and will continue to largely feed into the hands of various groups who exploit some of these gaps in order to pursue their agendas over time.
Let's talk about funding a little. To what extent, what are the sources of funding for these organizations, and which one of them is winning the financial race?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Funding. What are the sources of funding and income for these organizations? How do they fundraise, and who is winning this financial race?
Well, I'm not really strong in this area, but one way I will tell you that funding is done is to the best of my knowledge, is via organized crime. The attack on various institutions, sabotaging of various institutions, selling of mineral resources such as crude and other precious materials like gold and all, um, forms the source of funding for various groups. I earlier mentioned the issue of kidnapping. and ransom collections are very, very big. As at last 2 years, a popular senator in Nigeria had mentioned that if if terrorists budget on kidnapping, their ransom collection was ever put on the in stock market, they will have one of the highest highest return over the years, in which was running into billions at some point. So organized crime and illegal trade routes continue to be one of the major source of funding for various actors. And in terms of who is winning in the financial game, I think it likely has to deal with who controls the most territory at a particular time. Of course, Boko Haram will not be able to kidnap somebody and keep them for a long time if they were operating within ISIS or ISWAP held territory. And given that ISWAP has more control in various areas, in particular in Nigeria, and it varies across the Sahel. One will see ISIS, given their strong network of groups and all, as one that's really leading in this area.
At some point, all these organizations were quite active on social media and were also producing their own publications and outreach, basically outreach informational output. To what extent is that still true? Are their communications still fairly active on social websites, and what can be learned from their communication styles?
With the growing push that we see in the world for social media scrutiny, by scrutinization by various social media giants, there has also been an equal push um for um for online neutrality, while engaging on some of these platforms. And there have been various platforms that have allowed for individuals and groups to remain anonymous in their various campaigns. Twitter, which for one was comfortable base for some of these groups to, not really be active, but push out some of these soft propaganda materials like videos and all of that, which of course people could easily pick and use for various use, particularly anti-government groups that will always want to criticize government could easily pick some of these videos and continue to share and reshare and to criticize government. In turn, this helps to, push certain propagandas for these groups to show themselves to be strong, undefeated, and undeterred despite security operations in the country. In terms of intergroup communication and all, we've had various social media platforms, like I mentioned, that have popped up that allows for neutrality, such as Telegram for one, as much as and other groups, other social media platforms that I couldn't really mention now. But some of these groups have continued to allow for some of these propaganda push. And given the fact that there are tons of information that anyone can source from on the internet, and the various grievances that continue to linger across borders and within nations as well, groups can continue to leverage on some of these sentiments to push, like I mentioned, soft propaganda that helps over time to really adjust the thinking and understanding of certain persons, and the chances of them leaning to want to join or participate in jihad activities. I know.
Would it be fair to say that these organizations feed off what they observe online, already existing grievances, to kind of polarize them further and to enhance and distort information until people are more susceptible to recruitment and influence?
Indeed, yes. Indeed, yes.
And to what extent is on this online radicalization process the more the more active part of the process versus radicalization through local environment and in-person interactions.
Sorry, can you say that again?
To what extent is social media a bigger, a factor compared to in radicalization compared to in-person and environmental factors?
So first we'll have to understand that social media appeals to a certain demography in society and not everyone as a whole.
Mhm.
But there are still certain platforms like Facebook. Facebook is largely used by literally everyone, even down to the local wards and villages in certain areas. As long as you're able to get a working internet able phone, it's easy to come across both the main version of Facebook and also the low data consuming version of Facebook that allows people to really engage on social media and all. So social media in its own way, it's a tool among other tools, both in person and and other forms of radicalization um, approaches used by leveraged by some of these groups over the years to really, like you mentioned, leverage on grievances and certain sentiments in public space over time.
And has the government been able to utilize this information from observing social media accounts to penetrate or disrupt these cycles and these organizations and their activity?
Um, Around yesterday, I'd argued with someone that um in Nigeria, for example, I feel like we are quite strong with countering propaganda tied with political activity than dealing with our security problems. We face a serious issue of not significantly and intentionally pushing out counter propaganda to deal with some of this misinformation from groups and all of that. Um psyops and various approaches for information warfare need to be effectively utilized in order to get an upper hand in really getting our messages out there. This is not to say that there are no initiatives currently in place. There are
Mhm.
various television and radio jingles that have been able to penetrate communities through um, that are beyond the reach of social media and all. And but a lot of these things need to be really worked on. And aside from putting out the information, these things in reality need to be put in place. Security needs to be put in place to assure people that, what you're telling me, what you're singing in my ear from now and then, also reflective of what I'm seeing. You're not just telling me that you're winning the war against terrorism when my community or the roads that I have to pass are controlled by insurgents. So it largely has to go with doing more in walking the talk and talking the walk.
To what you mentioned that the government has been able to reclaim some of these territories, but others apparently are still under the hold of terrorists. To what, how do these operations work in practice? How does where is the stronghold the strongest, and where is it possible to make progress? How's that determination made?
I think it has to do with really re-energizing our internal security mechanism because the the dependency on external security agencies like the military, for example, is really growing burdensome on its capabilities over time. You don't have communities that are largely being protected by the military over the years. These are men and women that do have families as well that need to go home to their loved ones. You have soldiers who have been in battlefront for more than 5 or 7 years without going home and all. And these things, over time wear people down. These are not robots. These are still human beings and all. So I strongly believe that the internal security mechanism needs to be strengthened so that where the military is able to reclaim certain territories, the local authorities there are given the right capabilities and tools to defend themselves and to continue the fight in the absence of the military for them to reclaim more environment. And when everyone is able to while everyone is able to do this in sync and with as well as other initiatives in really defeating radicalization propaganda and campaigns and all of that, I feel like we will then see we could then see progress being made. But where certain actions are not being complemented adequately by um, other aspects of counterterrorism, we'll continue to have this issue of back and forth where you're reclaiming territories, you're leaving, and these guys only just wait for you to leave after a week or so or a month and then come back to reclaim those territories again.
So what more needs to be done besides what sort of investments need to be made to prevent this recruitment from being effective and to push these organizations out completely?
I think some that has have been mentioned by many experts, and I could reiterate. Bordering around strengthening intelligence gathering effort, in identifying key actors and taking disrupting their network. Because as long as whoever is funding such initiatives or such initiatives are being funded consistently, it will continue to the Hydra-headed monster will continue to grow, and you have new persons being recruited, new persons being energized and strengthened to carry out terror attacks. And then we have the issue of improving our border security. With our porous borders over a thousand porous borders across Nigeria. There will continue to be networks for the illegal movement of persons and weapons into the country to fight and cause chaos within the country. I spoke about the strengthening of internal security mechanisms in the country in order to ensure that where success have been made um, by by the military, local security mechanisms can help to continue to bluster such effectiveness and such efforts on the long run. And most importantly is addressing root causes. Without dealing with some of the socioeconomic and local grievances that have led people to get themselves into insurgencies or terrorism, as it would, we will not find a solution because as long as those grievances still linger, people are bound to still tap onto some of those grievances and allow it to influence their judgment and drive them and be a driving force to terrorism or to carrying out certain actions.
Meanwhile, we are seeing quite a lot that there's been a past decade of Western counterterrorism efforts in the Sahel and in the region with very mixed results. Uh, but recently, Niger has pushed out the UN peacekeepers, then gotten rid of the French presence altogether as well. And before Niger, there were Mali and Burkina Faso. How do you think getting rid of these Western French and other counterterrorism contingencies going to impact the security situation concerning international terrorist organizations?
So the cool epidemic in the Sahel continues to be another major issue that is really taking us back in terms of the achievements that have been gained over time again in the war against terrorism. We first saw Mali and Burkina Faso um, being taken over by military juntas, and despite jumping on the bandwagon of anti-French sentiment and pushing out colonial masters and all of that, these juntas have not been able to come up with clear initiatives in order to help their nations or to move them back into an effective or more accountable democracy that they have mostly championed over the years. But in terms of our conversation here, of course, democratic nations find it hard to work with undemocratic nations that due to our various regional and international um, signatories to various institutions and bodies that really champion democracy here in Africa. And so with the emergence of a military coup in Niger, you find one of our strongest ally in the region in the fight against terrorism is lost to this backward mentality of bringing about change in Africa through crude and selfish means. Um, the coup in Niger, for example, has we saw the transition from being an issue of largely a situation that had to do with just the colonel himself to joining the whole bandwagon of taking out the French and pushing for a democratic Niger Republic, and which we know will see play out over the years as another um, theatrics again of the military coming into politics, where there is a period of time where the military continues to control the nation with no clear or visible change in the country's economic woes, and then someone emerging from being a military officer to a civilian and taking over the country over the years. And of course, this largely affect our counterterrorism efforts and collaboration in pushing out groups. With the military in these three countries now really focused on politics instead of security solely. You have large swaths of claimed environment over time backsliding into the hands of terror groups whom will largely leverage on such environments to be launch pads for attacks and recruitment for their various ideological beliefs. It's quite an unfortunate one. It's quite an unfortunate one, given the significant progress that Niger Republic had made in its fight against terrorism over the years. Um, there have been calls for military action in order to take in order to bring about democracy back in the country, and we've seen a certain portion of the of Nigerians supporting this military junta. And of course, that is one aspect of achievement that the junta can really leverage on, having the legitimacy from the people, which is important for every democracy. The people are largely that factor, that determining factor of what constitutes as an authority in any environment.
Do you foresee a time where the crashes, where the border security issues between these organizations can overwhelm, um, can bring about the unity of these, insurgents and terrorists, and overwhelm government capabilities if if these new juntas are not prepared for them? Can you see more of a takeover of these countries? And actually, do you see a possibility that these terrorist organizations can literally take over portions of the state or attack the state in attempts to vie for political power and not just for control of some portions of the territory?
again, this will largely have to do with the people or on how they perceive this new authority in power in a scenario where the economic situation in the country um continues to worsen, and certain aspects of the country continues to deteriorate. Insurgent groups will largely leverage on this sentiment to push for some sort of rebellion and insurgency against the government. And in the case where you have a certain region or a certain portion of the country all having this consensus of an idea against the government, then of course you have territories slipping into the hands of new groups and new ideological movements thereabout, which over time will seek cooperation of various armed actors that will help to bolster their strengths in order to face the government and all, which will largely turn out to be a very, very chaotic situation on the long run.
Has there been efforts by the governments to bring some of the groups and their leaders into the fold, to negotiate with them and to try to integrate them or even give them a seat as at the political table? We've seen such efforts in other countries.
Not that I'm aware of. None that I'm aware of.
Do you see that as something that's being discussed or something that some of these groups will push as a means of a gaining political concession and broader legitimacy?
I think it will be unwise to see negotiations with terrorist organizations in the country, because what you will then have is perhaps opening a new platform for the realization of the caliphate that some of these groups have envisioned for a very, very long time. And of course, will be a very, very interesting dynamic to see, but really it will be an unwise situation. What will expect the Nigerian government to authorities at the moment to do will be to really look for a way to, really push for accountability within its action, and pushing for a democratic transition in order to push for regional support across ECOWAS bound states in really pushing for consensus against terrorism in the region.
One thing I'm wondering about, we've heard a lot from recent various summits about, and from the US about anti-corruption campaigns, pro-democracy investments in society. How much of any of this has actually come to pass? Do you see any real serious outside investment that would help with this, not just counter-terrorism, but counter-extremism, counter-ideological, and the strengthening of social order? Or do you think it's not possible if the juntas are controlling everything? And do you think it's a cycle that will never end because of this impossibility of transition?
So, of course, many experts have spoken about this coup, that the inability for international partners and also regional partners to really bring about a change and a resolve to the situation will empower other nations to really take such steps as well. Um, yes, there is a possibility that such will continue, but I don't see how that will play out in being a right move, a move in the right direction for any country or any institution, and that can be easily exemplified with some of the countries that have deteriorated into military regimes over the years here in Africa. Like in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, there have been so much talks about Russia, but there is no way of solely seeing Russia as a regional partner when you are blocked from conducting trade with your regional partners and your neighbors over time. So it's not an ideal approach for any of these nations to go, and it will largely land them in failure because, like I mentioned, as it happens in every nation where there is economic strain and there continues to be backsliding
Mhm.
in development, there will definitely be an uprising over the years to push for a change in regime change, such as the regime have seen some significant amount of support when the people are fully felt the impact of sanctions and other strategic ways to pressure the regime to move out. I believe they will over time see some level of pushback from the people as well.
The last question is just to end on a slightly less pessimistic note. The terrorist organizations are also not stable. They are also prone to infighting, political struggles, even physical wars with each other. To what extent is it possible to exploit these divisions and to kind of use these internal differences, ideological and political, among all these groups against themselves to weaken them and to push them out?
Um, well, I believe various institutions within the country that I may or may not be privy to are fully functional and effective in carrying out such aspects of counterterrorism efforts in destabilizing groups. So far, some of them have been quite effective in terms of looking at the result that we've achieved in Nigeria so far. I feel like those forms of operation solely are not will not give us the results that we need or on the long run. But indeed, they are quite effective and will continue to be quite effective in really pushing, weakening some of these groups and really help supporting military efforts to effectively decimate such institutions.
Indeed, while we've seen this series of coups in the Sahel, Nigeria appears to be stable and uh, making improvements, at least in some areas so far. I mean, since the last election, there has been surprisingly more quiet and less noise complaining about the political situation. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And what does that mean?
Here in Nigeria,
Mm-hmm.
like they say, Nigerians are very resilient, and many had anticipated post-election um, violence after the highly contested election. But I think the peace and quiet that we have witnessed so far has to do, of course, with the body language from the key opposition actors in the person of Atiku Abubakar and Peter Obi of the Labour Party, and also Kwankwaso of the NNPP. These particular groups have or actors and so have largely pushed for calm and accountability post-election. One of those ways for pushing for accountability has been have been taking the election, contesting the election result in court. I think we may have not seen the storm yet, considering since there have been allegations of tampering with court processes by the president administration. So I believe in the absence of accountability and transparency from the judiciary, whom is being looked up to at the moment to really bring about peace and sanity in the country, they might be aspects of post-election tension or violence that may seem from the hearing of final um, judgment from the judicial tribunal.
So what happens with that remains to be seen. Let's hope that the safeguards for election integrity will ultimately prevail, and at the very least that we can see by the next time some political improvements and resistance against any further interference and undemocratic meddling. So far, Nigeria remains in sort of a safeguard against the sort of instability we are seeing proliferating in the West, and that there is a cause for concern that it can spread if it continues unconstrained as it is, and if these new juntas are not able to respond effectively to the security situation. But that is something that only time will tell. Let's hope that also broader institutions can get involved in monitoring and providing some level of support for the very issues that you mentioned. In the meantime, I hope the message from here is clear that counterterrorism alone, military operations alone are not enough. There's a broad range of issues, from intelligence gathering to communications to funding to social issues and the strengthening of civil society and the corruption mechanisms that is all needed to counter the ideological hold by these insurgencies and these groups seeking to take advantage of social weaknesses. And I hope that the broader international community is listening, because that is not a mistake we can afford to repeat. We've seen all of that before. With the rise of Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the Middle East, we do not want a continued spread of it throughout Africa. That is for sure. Thank you so much, Jesse, for joining us today. For those watching the program, we'll be back next week again, same time, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Thank you so much for watching and for joining us on this important discussion about counterterrorism issues in West Africa, especially after the most recent out of a series of coups now in Niger. And please come back next week for continued discussions on topics of global and national importance. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.